Okay, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our final closing keynote here in this building as part of our 5 year celebration of the European University for Wellbeing and as part of our festival here today. And it is my great pleasure. I have to look here. Sorry, Laurie, I was looking at here on the screen, but I have to look here. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you our closing keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Laurie Santos, Professor of Psychology at Yale University. Laurie cannot be here in person today, but has very kindly accepted to be talking to us and with us online, which is fantastic. And we are very honored that you have agreed to be here. When we thought about who to ask to give this closing keynote today, we could not have thought of a more suitable person, really, for this task than Laurie Santos. Her record-breaking course on what the science of happiness tells us about how to live a more fulfilling life, yet again proves the research-backed, scientifically proven relevance and importance of well-being and also happiness. In addition to her work on the evolutionary origins of human cognition, Laurie is now an expert on the science of happiness and the ways in which our minds also lie to us about what makes us happy, among many other things. Her Yale course, Psychology and the Good Life, teaches students and now also young teenagers how the science of psychology can provide important hints about how to make wiser choices in life and what makes life more fulfilling. The class became Yale's most popular course in over 300 years and has been featured in the New York Times, NBC Nightly News, and so on. In its online version, The Science of Wellbeing, it has until now attracted more than 4 million learners from around the world. And many of you might know her wonderful podcast, The Happiness Lab. I'm a real fan of this, which has also attracted more than 100 million downloads since its launch. Laurie was recently voted as one of Popular Science Magazine's Brilliant 10 Young Minds and was named in Time Magazine as a leading campus celebrity. How wonderful is that, Laurie? Thank you very much again for agreeing to talk to us. There are many fans here in this room and also online. I'm among them as well. It is my great pleasure to introduce Laurie Santos. Dear Laurie, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but it's nice to be able to be there virtually. And to close off what seems like a really fantastic conference celebrating your 5 year anniversary. What I want to do today is to talk a little bit about the history of the class that I teach at Yale, why I got interested in teaching it, and how well it went. But then I want to spend more time, since I know there's some students in the audience, walking through what I think we really learn about what we should understand about how the science of well-being can help us. What are some strategies that my students learn in the course and are especially relevant where we find ourselves in 2025 and all the kind of challenges that we face. But just to get started, as mentioned, I'm a faculty member here at Yale University. I've been teaching there for over 2 decades. But in just the last couple years, I took on a new role on campus. I became what's called a head of college, which means as a faculty member, I live with students on campus and I get to see their lives up close and personal. And I honestly didn't like what I was seeing when I first took on this new role. I was seeing the US college student mental health crisis. And this is something I was seeing on campus at Yale, but it was also the kind of thing that I was learning was happening nationally. And so just so you can get a sense of how bad this is in my country here in the US, I'll show you some pretty bad statistics about US college student mental health. And you'll note that these were from a national college health assessment that took place in 2019. So as we fast forward to 2025, things might be even worse. But here's what's happening nationally to US college students right now. More than 40% of college students report being so depressed it's difficult to function. So they're so sad most days they can't function. Over 50% of US college students say that they feel hopeless all the time. Over 2/3 of US college students say that they experience overwhelming anxiety, which is the highest level of anxiety they could report on this national survey scale. Another 2/3 of college students report being very lonely. This was something that I was surprised by in my work as a head of college. I remember college as a time when students were connecting with others, who are like them, their same age, and so on. But right now, more than 2/3 of students report feeling lonely most of the time. Students are also very busy. So in this survey, over 80% of college students report feeling overwhelmed by all the work they had to do. And then this turns out to turn into even worse mental health statistics, like the fact that right now, nationally in the US, more than 10% of US college students have seriously considered suicide in the last year, right? And so this was what I was seeing on the ground, and I was very worried about it. I'm showing the US statistics, but of course, we are seeing similar kinds of mental health issues across Europe and across other countries as well. And so for me, this raised a big question, which is what can universities do to solve this student mental health crisis? I worried a lot that our students just weren't learning the things that we were teaching them if so many of them were struggling with their mental health at this level. And so what I decided to do back in 2018 was I said, well, maybe one way for universities to solve this crisis would be to develop new academic courses about happiness, to literally use the things that we as psychology professors do, namely teach students about psychology, but to teach students not just about the statistics of psychology, but real practical strategies that they could use to feel better. When I first designed the class, I wasn't sure, how it would work. I wanted students to pay attention. I called the class Psychology in the Good Life, which sounds kind of cool for a US college course. I wanted to be something that students noticed. But when I first taught the class, I assumed that, around 40 students would take it because is what's typical for a new psychology class. You heard the punchline already, but it wasn't 30 students. I walked into a classroom that looked like this. When I first taught the class in 2018, 1 out of every 4 students at Yale took the class, so a quarter of the entire Yale student body, which was, impressive, humbling. It was a little bit of a logistical problem to get all the students in the same room and so on. But it taught me that students don't like this culture of feeling so anxious and stressed out, and that they really wanted evidence-based solutions to do better. So that was the initial story of the class. But what I didn't expect was that the class would be popular not just on Yale's campus, but much more beyond. Right after we first started teaching the class, we realized that other schools were paying attention, other schools in the US. So we had articles, in the Princeton newspaper and the University of Pennsylvania newspaper. All these colleges around the US were saying, look at what Yale's doing. We at our school need a class like this as well. So other colleges in the US were paying attention and saying, we need this on our campus as well. But an even more surprising thing happened when we started getting lots of news reports about the class. About 2 weeks into teaching the class, we had an article in the New York Times, which is one of the biggest newspapers in the US, about the class and how shocking it was that students at Yale who, are young and very successful, they're at an Ivy League institution, are all flocking to this class to try to learn about strategies for happiness. And that was when the class started to go viral, not just on campus and not just on other college campuses, but really around the country. We had all of these news outlets that were coming in to film the class, talking about the class. It became this interesting national conversation. But what I definitely was surprised by was the fact that this conversation turned not just national, but international. And so we had lots of news outlets from around the world writing about the class in languages that I don't speak myself. So if you speak French or Spanish, I know many of you speak German, you can tell me what they're saying about my class because I don't actually even know. But yes, all around the world, we had articles about what was happening in the class, and people were really interested, did not expect this to happen. And so we asked the question, given that there's so much interest in this class, maybe we should develop a version of it where we can teach these strategies about happiness beyond just Yale's campus. And that was when I decided to develop the Coursera version of the class that I taught. This is the one where I teach the class online where it's available for free. And we were able to do this because Yale University has a really large digital learning collaboration with Coursera, which is an online learning platform where learners can access course content for free. And we decided to film a version of this class to put online on Coursera. We did this in my head of college house. This is where I lived when I was head of college on campus. We set up our living room as a sort of filming area for students, and we filmed a version of this class that was meant to look like a small salon, with a small subset of students who were learning about this, so we could really talk about the course in detail. But the class online had all the same strategies that I taught my Yale students in the live version of the class. And so it launched on Coursera in late 2018, just before the pandemic, interestingly, again, kind of giving learners free access to this content. And this was another thing we didn't expect to take off and go viral. but it really did. As of right now, we've had just under 5 million learners. We're just a little bit under the 5 million learner mark. But that's incredible. It means that the reach of this class has gone beyond anything anyone expected. And we're also seeing the fact that we can scale this class up worldwide. And so here's just a map of where we have learners in our Coursera course taking the class. And you can see it's much more worldwide than we ever expected by kind of putting this class together, which has been pretty incredible. And so that all raises a question. We've, been able to impact many, many students, both on campus and beyond. Hopefully, we've inspired some of you in the room to do, similar kinds of courses at your own universities. But this raises an interesting question, which is this working? Are students who take the class any happier, right? Are we actually delivering what we promise, which is that we share these strategies in the hopes that students will put them into practice and use them? Well, this was a project that I was able to study on the Coursera learners. I teamed up with these folks, especially David Yaden, who's a professor at the University of Johns Hopkins in the US here, as well as some other team members here at Yale. And what our goal was to test whether or not this science of well-being class, which we thought of as the experimental condition, whether students in that class from before the class to after the class felt happier than students in a control course. And for the control course, we just used the standard Introduction to Psychology class that Yale also has on Coursera.org. So this is also an online, massive open online class that students can sign up for. Students are learning all kinds of concepts in psychology, but they're not learning about the science of happiness. So this was our control course. And what we did was we had learners in both of these classes take the standard PERMA measure. This is the one that Marty Seligman and his colleagues have used, which measures positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. We had students take that survey before the class and just after they finished the class. And the question was, first of all, do students go up in happiness? And do students in the Science of Wellbeing class do that more so than the students in the control condition? And so I'll just show you the graph. I'm plotting the PERMA well-being score on the y-axis. The white bars will be the happiness class, Science of Wellbeing, and the dark bars will be the control condition. And what we found was two things. One is that students in both classes actually significantly improved their happiness, which is very nice as a psychology professor. We could say, oh, just teaching students some psychology actually makes them feel better, which is great. But interestingly, above and beyond what we see in the control condition, students in the well-being class show a significant improvement in their overall PERMA scores. They basically go up about a little bit over a point on a 10-point happiness scale. And this was exciting for us because, of course, this is in the online version of the class. It means we're really scaling up these strategies in ways that students are using over time. But all of this was, back in 2018 when we first launched this class and so on. We're fast forwarding now to 2025, and I think it's safe to say, things haven't been good. The metaphor we use in the US, that my students use, is that it's been a dumpster fire when it comes to our collective happiness, right? And I think for lots of reasons, we're seeing incredible instability in politics, right? Especially in the US, but around the world. We have worries about the climate and the economy. Things just feel much more unstable than they used to. And I think our students also feel much more overwhelmed than they even have in the past, both with their academic duties, but a lot of what's going on in the world too. And so the question that I want to end with today is sort of how can students really become happier in 2025? Of all the kinds of strategies that I've taught students throughout giving them these courses, which are the ones that I think matter the most? And so I'm going to walk through, just because we don't have that much time, I think the 5 insights we get from the science of happiness that I think have been most important for students, and the ones that I think, if you're a student in the room right now, I hope you'll take with you as you focus on your own well-being and mental health. And I want to start with the insight that I think is the most important, which is the idea that studies show that happiness matters both for leadership and for performance. What do I mean here? I think one of the misconceptions we have about happiness is that we get the direction of how happiness works wrong. We assume that we will perform. If you're a student, you'll get good grades, you'll be successful, and that will make you happy. And that to do that, sometimes you have to sacrifice your mental health. Maybe you can't sleep as much as you'd like, or you can't get as many social connections as you'd like. But it's worth it because at the end, you'll feel happier. What we don't think is that if you focus on your mental health at time 1, if you get enough sleep, get enough social connection, then you'll perform better. But what studies continue to show is that that's really how happiness works. If we focus on our mental health at time 1, we'll wind up feeling happier down the line. It's not what we expect, but it's what studies continue to show, that our happiness matters for what we might consider the bottom line, for the real fundamental goals in life. What do I mean by the fundamental goals in life? Well, let's take a big one, employment. We want our students to get jobs. Our students are worried about what they need to do to get jobs. Maybe they're worried about getting skills in AI or, all the kinds of things that they're worried about. What they don't often think is that they should be focused on their positive emotion. But this is what the late Ed Diener studied back in the 1980s. He brought students into the lab and measured their cheerfulness on a standard psychometric survey of cheerfulness, and then used that measure of cheerfulness to predict those students' job obtainment, not at age 18, but later in their late 20s, so when students were 25, and then even later in their 30s. And what he finds is that those students who self-reported being the most cheerful at age 18, they were the ones who got a job in their 20s and 30s. They were the ones who were happy in their job in their 20s and 30s, but they were also the ones who were making the most money. We often assume that money will make us happier, and as many of you in the room know, there's a complicated relationship where that's true if you're not earning very much money. It's probably not as true if you're earning a lot of money. But what we don't think is simply being happier, focusing on our positive emotion, will make us earn more money. We don't think happiness leads to money. But studies seem to show that. Both Ed Diener's study in its original form, other related follow-ups by Sonia Lubomirsky and her colleagues, it seems like happier individuals wind up earning more. Now, we might ask, why is that the case? Maybe, companies are paying happy individuals more money. That seems wrong. We should try to fix that. Is that what's going on? No, the reason happier individuals are earning more money is because happier individuals are performing better. So my favorite studies look at this across all kinds of different domains. One that I like to tell different companies about when I'm off speaking to companies is the finding in the healthcare profession. You bring medical doctors into the lab and you give them a hard medical problem. But some of the doctors get to be in a good mood first. They just watch some silly videos that make them laugh. What happens? The doctors in the good mood are the ones who are most likely to come up with the correct medical diagnosis. They're the ones who are able to think a little bit more innovatively, a little bit better. And in some ways, you didn't need to hear about that study to know about the effect. Think of the last time that you were feeling really overwhelmed, just much too much on your plate, a lot going on, feeling very stressed out. Of course, you weren't thinking your best, ideas. You weren't doing your best performance-wise. You were probably triaging. You're probably taking things off your desk. You're probably doing things as quickly as possible just to get through things. We know in some sense that our mood affects our performance, but we forget how important that is. Now, all of that's at the individual level, but if that's really true, then what we should expect to find is that if individuals are performing better when they're happier, then it should be that collectives of individuals perform better when they're happier. And that might mean that even companies should be making more money if they have happier workers. If all of their individual workers are happier and performing better, maybe companies will make the most money. And this gets to one of my favorite papers from 2024. It's a paper by researchers at the University of Oxford, led by Jan-Emmanuel Deneve, the economist. And what they did was to team up with the job website Indeed, which is a job website where people rate all kinds of things about their job, from their salary to how good their manager is, but they also rate how happy they are at work. And so Jan-Emmanuel Deneve asked the question, could we look at the ratings on Indeed and then test the correlation between both an overall company's employee happiness, so the average worker happiness at an individual company, and how well that company is doing in terms of its stock performance. And so they had 15 million different job ratings of happiness across 5,000 different publicly traded companies. And so they could ask, is a company's average worker happiness predicting its profits? And so here's the graph that they found. I'm going to show you here. We're plotting the company's profits on the y-axis and the Indeed well-being score, which is the average well-being score based off these data on Indeed per company. And what you're finding is, I think, something that we probably should have known, but is kind of shocking, which is that happier companies are earning the most money. This is one of my favorite economic analyses for what I do. When people ask, well, why is focusing on student happiness so important? I'm like, this is why it's so important. It really gets to the bottom line. And so this is the big insight that I want to start with. I think we used to think of student happiness as kind of, a thing that's just nice to have, right? It's good to make sure we're making our students happy. But now I think we're realizing that it affects so many of the things we think of as the bottom line, both the jobs that our students are going to get, how they perform. And I think it's becoming even more important to companies that our individual students are focused on this. It matters more than we think. And this is why I like to start my talk with this image here. I think we need to bring our overall happiness and well-being to the front and center, but we also need to know the right strategies to build it. And that's what the rest of the insights I'll talk to you about today are about. What are the kinds of things we can really do to improve happiness? Not the misconceptions, the stuff we assume works to build our happiness but doesn't work as well as we think. What are the things we can really do to feel better? And that gets to top insight number 2, which is that if we really want to feel happier, we need to get social and we need to become more other oriented. We need to become more pro-social. I know you had Laura Aknin out for the keynote yesterday, so you've heard about this a little bit, but her work and the work of so many others shows that happy people tend to be more social. One of my favorite papers by Ed Diener and Marty Seligman from the early 2000s entitled Very Happy People studied this directly. They asked what makes very happy people, people who self-report being very happy, different than the not so happy people. And they find one of the main effects is a social one. It's just how much time you spend with other people and also how much you prioritize time with your friends and family members. The people who report being very social are just happier. In fact, Diener and Seligman think this is so important that they say social connection is a necessary condition for high happiness. But of course, this is something we tend not to prioritize, especially here in the US. So many of my college students are lonely, don't have time for their friends. I think this is something that we really need to promote among our students if we want them to be happier. But of course, based on Laura's work, it's not just being around other people, it's making sure that you're focused on helping other individuals. And this is something that culturally I think we're missing. Especially in the US right now, there's a lot of talk about self-care, right? This idea of doing nice things for yourself. But if you look at Laura's work and others, what you find is that happy people aren't focused on the self. Happy people tend to be focused on others. They're doing nice things for others, spending time on others, spending their money on others. And her work has shown that if you force people to do nicer things for others, they'll wind up being happier. One of my favorite of Laura's studies is the one in which she walks up to participants on the street, hands them 20 US dollars, and tells them how to spend it. She says either, hey, here's $20, spend this to do something nice for yourself, or here's $20, spend this money on someone else, do something that's a little bit more pro-social. And what she finds is at the end of the day, and even at the end of the week, participants who spend the money on others wind up feeling happier. And so I think this is the, first important insight we need our students to take to heart, which is that if we want to be happier, we need to promote more social connection. And we need to look at the things that are an opportunity cost against that social connection. What's preventing it and how can we do a little bit better? That's the second insight. Now we get to insight number 3, which is a mindset change that seems to matter for happiness. And it's that if we really want to be happier, we need to find ways to be in the present moment. Of course, there's a lot of talk about mindfulness, but I think we don't spend a lot of time engaging with mindfulness. We spend a lot more time doing this. This is my favorite kind of picture of mind wandering, where you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner or that conversation you had with your partner. You're not paying attention to what's going on. Researchers Matt Killingsworth and Dan Gilbert estimated just how often we spend mind wandering, and they find that we are in this state of not paying attention just under 50% of the time, which is pretty sad. But this also has a happiness consequence. They also found that whenever we self-report mind wandering, our mood is a little bit lower than we're just mindfully on task. So it seems like mind wandering it winds up making us feel unhappier. The name of their paper was A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. And so we need strategies to get back to the present moment. And I think the research gives us 2 that I like to tell my students about. One is the simple act of savoring. If you're eating something delicious, what does this taste like? What does this feel like? Can you get into the moment and notice it? That's one strategy we can use in the here and now, in the moment. But there's another strategy that helps us build up our mindfulness over time, and that's the practice of meditation. My read of the literature is it almost doesn't matter what kind of meditation you're doing, whether you're focused on your breath or maybe a mantra, even if you're engaging in prayer. What the studies show is that what you're trying to do is to intentionally focus on something, say your breath, and what happens is your mind wanders away, you kind of pull it back, and your mind wanders away, and you pull it back. All those pullbacks are kind of like little bicep curls for your mind. It's like doing arm exercises within your head. And what the studies show is that the more kind of repetitions you do, the more times you have to pull your mind back, the better you're learning how to become present over time. In fact, research studies by my former colleague, Hedy Kober, who's now at the University of California at Berkeley, finds that even 5 to 10 minutes of meditation a week can wind up increasing your presence muscle, even if you're a novice meditator. And so I think this is something we need to take to heart. We need to find better ways to be in the present moment. It matters for our happiness. But this insight, top insight number 3, I think comes with a different side, which is that we don't just need to be in the present moment when the present moment is good. We also need to be in the present moment when the present moment feels awful, when things are pretty bad. And again, as I said, in 2025, lots of us are experiencing some not so good moments right now. And I think it's important to talk about this. I think this is something our students get wrong. In the US, lots of students talk about this idea of good vibes only, right? Like good emotions only. And I think we need to remind them that negative emotions are normal. It's normal to feel frustrated with what's happening in the world. It's normal sometimes to feel anxious about the things you see going on. It's normal for our very busy students to feel overwhelmed. Those are normal emotions, but they don't feel good. And sometimes when emotions don't feel good, our instinct is to try to suppress them, to try to pretend they're not happening. But research studies show how problematic that is. One of my favorite studies is by James Gross, a professor at Stanford, and he brings his participants into the lab and has them do a task where they watch sad videos online, but they're told to suppress their emotions. So you watch a sad video, but James Gross says, whatever you do, try not to feel sadness, try to push that emotion down. Subjects can try to do that, but there are consequences. One consequence is a cognitive one. If you give subjects a memory test, they don't do as well over time. But there are also physical consequences. James Gross uses galvanic skin response to test what's happening in subjects' bodies. And he finds that they're actually going through stress in their heart, in their cardiac system, during this process of suppressing emotions. So we're hurting our cognition and we're hurting our bodies by suppressing emotions. So what can we do to do better? How can we get through negative emotions in a healthier way? Here, I love the practices that are broadly under the term of radical acceptance. And one of my favorite ones comes from the meditation teacher Tara Brach, and it goes by an acronym in English of RAIN, RAIN, which stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And so here's how this kind of meditation practice works. You first notice that you're feeling a negative emotion. Let's say you read something in the news that makes you feel very anxious, and you notice, oh, I'm feeling a little anxious right now. That's the start of this RAIN method. You first recognize, I'm feeling anxiety, or I'm feeling a little frustrated, and you kind of label that emotion and say what it is. Then you do the very hard step, which is the A, allow. You say, I'm just going to let that feeling be there in my body just as it is. But the key is that you give your brain something to do while you're letting that emotion sit there. And that's the next step, investigate. You try to pay attention to what this emotion feels like in your body with interest and care. And you might notice, oh, when I feel this emotion, my chest is feeling tighter. Maybe my face feels really tight. Maybe I have a strong craving. I want to look at my phone or check my email, right? Don't act on those like cravings, just notice that's what happens in my body. And the investigate step seems to work pretty well because if you're a clinician, you probably know that emotions are like a wave, like an ocean wave. They tend to kind of go up when you first notice them, but then over time they'll subside. And the investigate step works because you're giving your mind something to do while you're noticing those emotions. But you don't end there. There's still one step of this RAIN method, and that's the last letter, N, which stands for nurture. How can you nurture yourself with some self-compassion? What can you get off your schedule? Maybe you need to talk to a friend. What can you do to take care of yourself? Studies with these radical acceptance processes like RAIN show that you can reduce burnout even in occupations that have a lot of stress. In the US, this has been tested in palliative care workers, which are these folks who work with people who are dying, and even first responders, police officers, and firefighters. And if this method can reduce burnout in those populations, it's probably a very good strategy for helping our students as well. And so that's insight number 3. I think we need to make sure that we're reminding ourselves that we need to be in the present moment, not just when everything feels great, but also when things feel kind of difficult. Now we get to top insight number 4, which builds on that last step of the RAIN practice, the nurture step. And top insight number 4 is that if we want to be happier, we need to motivate ourselves with self-compassion. Many of the students I work with at Yale are very intense students. They're what in English we'd call a type A personality, where you're very intense, really worried about things, very driven. And that often comes with a certain kind of self-talk, a certain way of trying to motivate yourself, which we can think of as self-criticism. Often my students are very mean to themselves in their head. It's as though they're like a soldier with like a mean drill instructor, some like, corporal who's screaming at them inside their head. And I think students do that because they assume it works. They assume if they're very tough on themselves in their head, they'll wind up doing better and performing stronger. But of course, research looks at that, and it turns out that being very self-critical doesn't help. It winds up making you procrastinate, you experience resistance, and you feel bad, which you just heard is not good for your performance. So what's an alternative to that kind of critical self-talk? Well, one of the best ones I've seen is the act of self-compassion. This is research that's been popularized by Kristen Neff, who's a professor at UT Austin. And I think it's one of the best things I've included in my courses to teach students about. Kristen Neff defines the practice of self-compassion as having 3 parts or steps. The first step of self-compassion is what she calls mindfulness. You just need to notice mindfully how you're feeling. I'm struggling right now. I'm having a hard time right now. I'm frustrated right now. I just failed and I'm embarrassed by that, right? You mindfully notice what you're really feeling. But then you do the second step of self-compassion, which is what Kristen Neff calls common humanity. The idea is that this failure, feeling frustrated, feeling sad, these are common human experiences. So you take whatever you're experiencing and you say, well, that makes sense. It's normal that I'm feeling frustrated because all students feel that. It's okay that I'm feeling overwhelmed because it's a common human experience. You normalize the emotion you're going through. And you can already feel when I say that how it kind of takes some of the pressure off, right? You're feeling like, oh, it's normal. It makes sense that I'm feeling this. Then we jump to the last step of self-compassion, which is what Kristen Neff calls self-kindness. How can you be kind to yourself? How can you treat yourself like a friend? And I think this idea of treating yourself like a friend is a very important way to understand self-compassion. Sometimes when we hear the phrase self-compassion, we can think of it as self-indulgence. Like we're going to be, too nice to ourselves. We're going to let ourselves, mess up and it'll be okay. And we'll just ignore the real problems we have. But if you think about how you would talk to a friend, I hope you wouldn't be critical of a friend, but I hope you also wouldn't just let them do whatever they wanted. I hope if there was a real problem, you'd get curious. You'd say, I care about you. What can we do to fix this? How can we problem solve? And this is the same kind of thing you bring to yourself. Self-kindness is the act of getting curious and engaging in problem solving with yourself. No judgment, just how can I fix this? How can I do a little bit better? That's self-kindness. So Kristen Neff has developed this 3-part step of self-compassion where she teaches individuals how to engage in it. And what she's found is that it can have a whole lot of benefits that we don't expect. One of my favorite benefits is that Kristen Neff studies this in the US military, where she teaches individuals who are facing combat these 3 steps. And she finds that it reduces rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, this PTSD, or like when soldiers come back and experience the negative effects of trauma. What's interesting is these soldiers go through the same tough situations, but they're able to deal with them because they notice, I'm struggling and that's normal. It makes sense. How can I take care of myself, right? Powerful strategy for reducing trauma just through a different form of self-talk. But Kristen Neff also finds that it has other benefits. She finds that individuals who are more self-compassionate wind up eating healthier. They wind up exercising more. The idea is that it's easier to be nice to your future self if you're talking to yourself with a little bit more kindness. Very relevant for our students, she finds that self-compassion winds up reducing procrastination. So students can really take part in these tough, assignments that they have, a paper that they're kind of feeling scared about. They can jump in and work on it, not procrastinate it, in part because they're not, being so mean to themselves inside their heads. And finally, Kristen finds that self-compassion is a great way to improve your compassion to other people. It's very hard to be nice to ourselves. So if you practice compassion on yourself, it winds up being easier to engage with compassion with your teammates, with other students, with your siblings. For those of us who are faculty, we're nicer to our colleagues, nicer to our spouses, and so on. And so self-compassion is an incredibly powerful happiness practice. And that's top insight number 4. We need to motivate ourselves with self-compassion. Now we get to the last insight, which builds on how our students and how we ourselves can do a better job of loving our work. And we can do that by focusing on what positive psychologists call our strengths. So many of us got into the work we do because we wanted to find a sense of purpose. We want to do something that feels of use, that gives us a sense of meaning. But how do we do that? What should we be working towards? What I find with my students is they get a little bit off track. They really want to have perfect grades, do really well in school, and they feel like that's what's giving them purpose. But of course, that doesn't work in the way we think. So what's a thing we can have our students focus on that really will give them a sense of meaning and purpose? And here I love the research of Chris Peterson and Marty Seligman, which have focused on how we can feel more like our work is a calling by using our signature strengths. Peterson and colleagues have gone around cross-culturally to try to figure out the different virtues or strengths that we can have, different behaviors we can engage in that across cultures are seen as good, are seen as virtuous, but that we all differ a little bit in our natural propensity towards. And in the context of this work, they've come up with 24 of these different strengths. And I'll put the list kind of online on the screen for you to look at. And I really encourage you to sort of read through these. You'll notice that there are traits that we all think of as good cross-culturally, a sense of bravery or creativity, maybe a love of learning or a sense of teamwork. All of these things are good. But as you read through the list, you might notice some of these strengths that feel more like the kind of thing that you like a lot, that you feel great when you engage in. You might think, well, judgment is good, but I'm really about humor, or I'm really into the appreciation of beauty. Researchers would say that the strength that pops out for you is what they'd call your signature strength. It's the one that when you exercise it, you will wind up feeling better. Now, there are formal tests online that you can take to figure out what your signature strength is. I think the best one is the Values in Action, VIA, character strength test. You can Google it and take that yourself. But I also find it works just to put up the big list of strengths, and people can sometimes notice what their own strengths are. And the reason to do this is that studies by Peterson and others show that when you engage in these signature strengths, you wind up feeling more like your job is a calling, right? If your strength is hope or prudence or kindness, when you do that act, you wind up feeling a lot better. But you might be saying, well, how do we have our students engage these strengths in their schoolwork? How do you exhibit bravery when you're doing your mathematics homework, or a sense of leadership if you're writing an English essay? How do we do that a little bit better? How can we use more of our signature strengths? Well, here's where I really love the work of Amy Resninsky. She's a professor at Wharton Business School who's focused on the practice of what she calls job crafting. What is job crafting? Well, it's the act of just taking whatever your job description is and finding ways to infuse these values and these strengths into your work. And the reason I love Amy's work so much is that she studies job crafting not in university students, or maybe not in professors who have a very creative, flexible job. She studies job crafting in hospital janitorial staff workers. So these are the cleaners in hospitals who are mopping the floors or washing the linen, on beds and things like that. This is not a job where you think people could creatively bring in their strengths. But she finds that 1/3 to 1/4 of janitorial staff workers, these cleaners, wind up saying that they love their job. And they tend to be the ones who are bringing in their signature strengths. She tells these lovely stories of these cleaners. One cleaner who worked in a hospital, and he was in a unit where individuals had cancer. So they were getting chemotherapy, this treatment for cancer. And oftentimes, unfortunately, the patients who got this treatment got sick. So they would often vomit on the floor. And so a lot of this man's job was cleaning up vomit. But he said, yeah, I have to do that. But my real job, what I care about most, is humor and social intelligence. My job is to make the patients laugh. And he had a kind of joke that he would use where he would tell the patients, oh, there's a lot of vomit today. I'm going to get overtime. I'm going to get more wages because I have to clean up more vomit. It's kind of a stupid joke, but the patient would often laugh and he would laugh. And he's like, that's what gives my life purpose. I get to make these patients laugh, right? The idea is that if cleaners in really tough, inflexible jobs can do that, then of course all of us can find ways to focus more on our strengths and bring these opportunities out. And I think this is something that we should especially be teaching our students, in part because we want them to find their strengths and use them. But also, I think it's a great way for our students to be thinking a little bit more creatively about how they can be happier on the job once they graduate. And so those are my favorite tips from the science of well-being. If you want to learn more, I encourage you, if you haven't already, to check out the Coursera class online. As I mentioned, lots of folks have taken it already. And as Beatrice mentioned at the beginning, we also have our podcast, The Happiness Lab, where we share lots of these different strategies in little short bursts. Great to listen to yourself and great to share with your students. But I hope I've convinced you that the path to happiness is important. It really matters for the life choices that we care about a lot. And I hope I've shared my favorite strategies for getting there. And I just wanted to thank everyone at EUniWell. It's congratulations on your 5th year anniversary. I've loved watching what you've been doing from across the way, and I really look forward to your questions. Thank you all so much.
Dear Laurie, thank you so much. I hope you could hear the applause. It was
I could see, yeah.
good. It was very, very long. And I can also tell you it was just so silent here during these 45 minutes because of your fascinating talk. And also, I think because of the way you do this, your outstanding science communication. So first of all, thank you very much for this. This is also visible in your lab. That's why you have all those fans. And also thank you very much for holding up the role of science in everything we are doing. I think this is more than important. I know you do this in all your, when you do your happiness podcast and so on. It always starts with science, and then you slowly explain this to everybody, which is fantastic. And you do this in a wonderful way. This was my personal note, not just on this, but also on the happiness lab. Thank you very much for this. And there are, I hope, so many questions. Would anybody like to start here? Yes, Olga, there's the first question coming.
Thank you so much, Laurie. That was wonderful. We all listened with red cheeks. And thank you so much. I was wondering, do you have any insights on the connection of nature, human to nature, and how this makes us happy? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's a great question. More and more studies are coming out about the importance of the emotion awe, this sense of wonder. It's a positive emotion that we often forget, and it's a very interesting emotion. It's described as positive, but it also has these negative components. Awe can, like a real sense of wonder when you look out at nature or a scenic vista or the night sky. It makes you feel a little small, and so it's this very interesting positive emotion, which is a bit bittersweet. But studies by Dacher Keltner and his colleagues find that experiencing awe winds up boosting your well-being, but it also winds up boosting your social connection, which is really interesting. You go out in nature by yourself and you wind up feeling more connected to your community, is what Dacher finds. So a really powerful way of boosting social connection and boosting even pro-social behavior, the thing that Lara Aknin was talking about yesterday. So awe, I think, is a really important part of nature. And there are lots of ways to experience awe, but being in the natural world is a big one. I think there's also new studies coming out about the power of nature bathing, as it's called, just the simple act of being in nature. And research is finding that it can make us a little bit more present. So it increases presence, as I was talking about. But there's also studies showing that it overall just increases our sense of positive emotion. And so, yeah, I think nature is a great thing that we should be prescribing to our students. I think as universities, we should be thinking about how can we give our students a little bit more access to nature, like being out there. What does that look like? I think these are powerful ways to be boosting a sense of awe, but also well-being more broadly.
Thank you. Any other questions? I've got one or two or for you, Laurie. First of all, now with all this impact you've had, plus success, how is your well-being going? How do you feel? What do you
That's an important one. I think, one great thing about teaching this class is that I have to practice what I preach. If the happiness teacher is not taking care of her well-being, my students notice, and they love to call me out on it. If I'm walking around campus staring at my phone, they'll say something like, "Professor Santos, I thought you said social connection was important and that you shouldn't be on your phone." So they'll tell me if I'm not doing it. But yeah, I think this unexpected journey into becoming a happiness expert. And I hope the story at the beginning showed how unexpected it was. I was just thinking I would teach a class of 30 students, not that I would be talking to folks in Cologne, years later, right? So this was all very unexpected for me. But it's come with an incredible sense of purpose, an incredible drive to do what I do. Like, it's just been an amazing journey. But if I'm not careful, then I'm not going to protect my own sense of free time, right? I'm not going to have time to exercise and get social connection myself. And so I've had to be very careful. I say no to lots of opportunities. It's one of the reasons I'm here online and not in Cologne, so that, I can get lunch with my husband right after this, right? And protect my own social connection. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey. So far, I keep measuring my happiness, and I'm much happier since teaching the class. I too have gone up about a point or 2 points on that PERMA test, and I'm able to maintain it, yeah, just from teaching this class, right? Which, fits with what the data show. But it takes a lot of work to maintain it. Yeah.
Yeah. Kate.
Yes, thank you so much, Laurie. I wanted to pick up the question about nature connection because I guess there's another side to it. For many people today, thinking about engaging with the natural world is actually a source of great grief and anxiety because of ecological destruction, species extinction, climate anxiety. Is that something that that you have kind of addressed specifically? We see some statistics that indicate a rise in, what's sometimes called eco-anxiety, and depression and anger and all kinds of negative emotions.
Yeah, great question. So lately I've been doing a lot of work with people who work in the climate justice field, right? Because this is definitely a domain where they're worried about happiness and so on. And one of the things we talk about a lot when working with individuals who are on the front line, really working on climate, is that it's normal to feel some grief here. Right? It's normal to feel really sad about what we're seeing. It's normal to feel anxious. It's normal to feel angry, especially in the US, where I think so many policies are going in the wrong direction right now. And I think it's important to honor those emotions, right? For all the reasons I talked about, right? What we know is that pretending those negative emotions aren't there doesn't serve us well. And so that's really where I start with individuals who are going through the eco-anxiety, is to say, yeah, that makes sense. That's a normal thing to experience given what's really happening. And I find that that's very helpful, right? You can get to the point of kind of coming back to awe and so on, but you have to honor those negative emotions too. We also know that the act of honoring those negative emotions can be really important for performance. This is some lovely work by Konstantin Kushlev, who's a professor at Georgetown in the US. And he's asked the question, well, who is it that's really going out to fix those problems of climate justice, right? is it the case that if we just get so anxious about the climate, that will motivate us to do better? Maybe we want to have lots of negative emotion because that makes us want to fix things and change things. And what he does is he measures the emotions of students who participate more or less in climate justice, right? So people who are really taking action. So they're, calling politicians to get change done, or they're, getting people to put solar panels on their house, or they're donating money to ecological causes. And the prediction is that maybe it's the people who are very anxious about this stuff. What he finds is it's actually the people who have the most positive emotion who are taking the most action. So they're not the people who are reading the most about the climate and worrying about it the most. Those are the students who are the most anxious. But the ones who have the most positive emotion are the ones who are really doing the work to fix things. And I think this finding is really important because it really says if we want to fix the big problems, then we need to be focused on our positive emotion first. His work is also important because of something else my students worry about. I call it the sort of Pollyanna hypothesis. After, Pollyanna, this person who saw all these bad things and just pretended everything was fine. We can worry that that's what's happening with my students. Maybe by bringing 5 million people these strategies and making them all happier, I'm making them more complacent. They're less likely to take action to fix things. But Kushlev's work shows that that's not the case, that by having more positive emotion, it increases our ability to take action and fix things. So I think the eco-anxiety piece is a big one. I think we need to honor those negative emotions, but also remind people that if you want to make things better, you need to take care of yourself. The expression in English is you put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others, like they tell you on the plane. And I think what the studies show is we can do that with our own positive emotion to fix the big problems of the world.
Thank you. There are two more questions at least. You first, and then.
Thank you so much for a very inspirational lecture. I know that because nowadays we're also facing the aging society, right? So I truly believe that your happiness lecture will be also helpful for the healthy aging, for example. But concerning about the audience, did your course, because it's named as science and science of well-being, would you also classify, for example, for the children in the kindergarten or the school kids, or for old people, for example, or the people who are cancer survivors, for example, will you also distinguish a little bit of the content in the future, for example, for specific audience with different, health situation?
Yeah, so one of the challenges of putting this work online at scale is that anyone can access the Coursera class. We have learners who are young, who take the class. We also have learners who are much older. I get lots of letters and emails from someone saying, well, I'm not a college student, I'm 80 and I took your course and so on. And so we tried to, when we developed the course, to make it not just for college students and add things that are really specific to individuals who might be going through different life stages and so on. But one of the things we find is that people can take some of these strategies no matter where they are in life. I'll get, again, letters and emails from older individuals who say, well, I didn't think it was for me, but then, I heard these strategies about dealing with negative emotions and I thought, oh, that's so relevant. And so, so we haven't made it exactly for individuals at different stages, but we find it's very relevant. We did make two changes, though. One is that we heard from young people that they really needed different kind of situations and different examples to understand the material. And so we recently put a version of the class online just for teenagers. So this is for students who are maybe 13 through 18, so a little bit before college age, at least in the US. And that's basically the same kinds of studies and the same content, but it's set up with different examples so those students can understand it better. And then when we did that, what we found is that many of the people who took that class weren't teenagers themselves, it was teenagers' parents. And so we realized that lots of parents were saying, oh, I'm not a teenager, but my son's a teenager and I really wanted to learn. And so we did a second or third course for parents, specifically for parents, because we said, well, if parents really need this stuff, we should give it to them. But yeah, I think, a lot of, even in different situations, you often can apply the tips that, I'm telling to college students. They're still relevant at lots of different ages.
Thank you for that. One more question. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think the idea of making yourself more happy is really beautiful, but there's moments where strategies don't work or don't fit for everyone, right? And since if you're really trying to get happier and you have this idea of like kind of self-optimization, how do you not end up in this dead end of getting anxious about I'm not being happy enough?
Yeah, a great question to end on. I mean, this is something I see in my students a lot, right? Where they're very worried about happiness. As I said, in the US, there's this idea of good vibes only, which is good emotions only. You know, my students have this on little stickers and like in little water bottles and things, this slogan. And I worry about that because I think it makes us anxious that, oh, if I'm feeling a little sad today, something's wrong. Or if I'm feeling a little anxious today, something's wrong. And that's why I start with this idea of normalizing things and the importance of having negative emotions. The analogy I use for my students is that negative emotions are like that dashboard light on your car. You know, when you look in your car and it has the tire light and the engine light, you know, that come on when things are having problems. That's how we should think about our negative emotions. We shouldn't want to optimize them away because it'd be like, you know, getting rid of those signals on your car, which are helpful, right? You need to know if your tire is going low or if there's something wrong with your engine. If you don't, your car will break down. And I think we need to start thinking of negative emotions that way. To really optimize our happiness, we want to be able to notice, allow our negative emotions, mindfully give space for them, but we also need strategies to regulate them. And that's why I like that rain meditation practice that I told you about. It's a way that you can say, oh, I'm going to notice this tire light of my own emotion, you know, maybe saying I'm frustrated, but then I'll have a way to deal with it, to fix it. And so I think it's, you know, as we focus on happiness, we need to make sure we're getting happiness right. And I think when I think of happiness, I think more of the good life. I think back to the ancient Greeks who talked about eudaimonia and flourishing, where really what you want is some negative emotions, right? That's going to push you to be able to have a truly good life. So we want to optimize happiness, but we need to make sure we're doing it in the right way.
One more question, and then we let Laurie off to lunch.
You and I just want to say I appreciate we are partners. We're simplicity partners with the University. We're a well-being platform as well, so we're proud of that. And I have one question for you, Professor Santos. How can we integrate cultural differences? I'm a mom of 5, and my kid speaks 4 languages at home, and this is quite can be problematic. So also as a student, this can become. And I'm curious, how can we include these differences and the different emotions, how they are differently valued, and how they can be expressed so that they are part of those happiness indicators, right?
Yeah.
We struggle with that. No feeling of belonging to university because of cultural differences.
Yeah, this is a really tricky one. In part because, we're all, you're kind enough to not make me speak German because it would be a much shorter talk, as I just said, but I'm speaking about all these positive and negative emotions using English, right? And the words we use are a little bit different. In fact, English is a very impoverished language when it comes to talking about our subjective states, right? And so I think when we think about these cultural differences, it gets really tricky. Here's where I really love the work of Tyler Vanderweel and his colleagues at Harvard. They're actually putting together a huge lexicon of different emotion words for happiness and so on across different languages. And I encourage you to check it out. If you Google Harvard lexicon of emotion words, you'll pull it up. But he's making just kind of a catalog so we can understand, well, oh, there's terms that happen in German or in Norwegian or in Thai that seem very different, that we don't have similar words for, say, in English. And so it's partly to help to do the translation better when we're talking about these topics, but it's partly to help us use the tools that we have in other languages to maybe express different emotions that we have or different contemplative states. One spot where English is really bad is at talking about different states of contemplation. Many Asian languages are much better at doing that for different states of kind of feeling calm and so on. So I think that projects that try to catalog these things are really helpful. But one of the things I often feel really compelled by in the happiness work is just how surprisingly universal some of these tips are. This must be something I bet you heard from Lara before, when she started to look at, well, how does prosociality improve happiness across the world? It's like, it just seems to be universal. When you're nicer, you wind up feeling happier. And that's what I've tried to focus on in my course, not the spot where there are these interesting nuances and cultural differences, and there are many of them, but the spots that are universal, the stuff that across any culture, across any country where you engage in that behavior or that mindset, you'll wind up feeling happier. And so the focus on the universals, I think, is important. But I agree, the cultural differences are hard, and there's so much we can learn from other cultures when it comes to thinking about what we can do to feel happier and understanding our emotions.
Laurie, thank you very much again, and please let us give us one round of applause for Laurie.
Thank you all so much. See you all soon, and happy 5th anniversary. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much. Many transatlantic greetings from us here. Alone, and yeah, take good care and talk to you soon about everything, the organization of everything. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye. Enjoy your lunch. Ah, there she's gone. Very good. Yeah. So I'm very happy we managed to do this online, and I hope you enjoyed this talk a lot as well. I think it's a wonderful also, well, perhaps also summary of what we've been doing during the last 2 days, some of us even longer, 3 and 4 days, because you had meetings with working groups, we with the rectors, and of course the board. So we are about to finish these celebrations. We still have the role model evening later tonight, before then all of our festivities come to a close. And it has been just really fantastic to have you all here to celebrate EUniWell with all of us. I think much of what she said about well-being, I mean, resonated, I think, with what we are doing. And you see how science-based, we can also work and then translate this to well, our everyday life. And I very much remember, when we had the preparation for, or when we had the summit, and on our way to Constance, also did these walks of mindfulness in nature and so on. And it's not just a joke to do this, as we sometimes hear when we get criticism for all of this. This is crucial, as research shows now. And that's why I stress this so much. She has impressively shown this, I think. And yeah, these are the many facets of well-being. So many thanks to all of you. And again, many thanks. And I will say this in person in a smaller round again, to the great team that has organized these amazing 2 days. I'd like to stress this again, and the preparation beforehand. Thank you very much to all of you, Frau Sanke, Frau Schlepper, to everybody, Ruth, of course, Graham. Thank you. What can I say? This has been fantastic. Have a safe trip home. I'll say this already now because I'll just sneak in perhaps later tonight. Have a safe trip home. Cherish those memories. Be in the moment more often. I think that's also, as we've heard, very important. Thank you.